Intelligence officials in the UK are warning of the heightened risk of a terrorist attack in the United Arab Emirates. The Foreign Office in London has raised the terror warning for the UAE to the highest level. Up to 120,000 British nationals live and work in the country, and officials say locations frequented by expatriates could be targeted, as well as oil, transport and aviation interests. Well, Charles Pena is a senior fellow with the think tank, the Independent Institute. He's joining us live now from Washington. What do you make of this? Are you surprised, in fact, that the UAE hasn't actually been targeted before now?
Well, the UAE is certainly a lucrative type of target for Islamic extremists. I mean, it's very modernized, represents in many ways many of the things that Islamic extremists are against, and highly populated by foreigners, Westerners in particular. So maybe it's not a question of being surprised, but I am a little surprised by this most recent warning, particularly, the question is on what sort of intelligence is it based?
If we assume that this is Al-Qaeda, is it, do you think, a sign that Al-Qaeda is growing, or rather, do you think, is it a sign that they're moving into areas which they can be more successful in because they're not being successful elsewhere?
Well, Al-Qaeda, as we came to know it in the wake of 9/11, has changed dramatically, and now we're talking about a larger radical Islamic movement that's permeated the Islamic world that isn't necessarily Al-Qaeda proper, but certainly has many of the elements of the rhetoric of bin Laden. And we know that it is much easier for them to strike in the Middle East than elsewhere in the world. After all, that is where many of their followers and adherents are from, and it's much easier to take the fight there than to try and go overseas, whether it is to Europe or the United States.
Certainly then, American citizens being advised against traveling to the United Arab Emirates. I mean, all this, of course, would be devastating to the country in terms of its tourism and its trade, wouldn't it?
Right, which is why it is considered a very lucrative target. After all, it would be targeting Western interests and Western targets, and would have a huge psychological effect, as well as now that we are looking at record high prices for oil. The UAE is a very large oil producing country, and certainly there would be economic shockwaves as the result of a terrorist attack there.
Charles Pena from the Independent Institute, many thanks for being with us on BBC News.
You're welcome.